Thank you for watching. My name's Glen Morgan, and this is We the Governed. So today, this is my first video that I've done since the No Kings protests / riots, depending on where you were in the country, over this last weekend, where you had hundreds of these events all over the country. Of course, on the West Coast, many of these places and these events were not exactly peaceful. But then again, if you are a Democrat or work for the Seattle Times, setting fires and setting off fireworks and even assaulting people counts as a peaceful event. In fact, it was pretty amazing to see just how much the traditional news media, such as it is and whatever's left in the Seattle area, how they choose to just ignore things like the assault on Brandy Cruz and other journalists and anybody who dares to actually cover and report the truth, whereas you can always count on the traditional media to cover up pretty much everything. But of course, this raises lots of questions, and one of the questions was, we saw that Governor Inslee himself, the former governor here, well known for not a lot of good things, went out and he was actually speaking at this No Kings rally. And it was part of the story, I think, today, talking about what do they really mean by No Kings? Because after all, when Governor Inslee here was governor, and he acted just like a king during the COVID lockdowns. In fact, we did many, many videos and lots of articles and lots of stories and lots of rallies that I went to around Washington State, just remembering exactly what kind of abusive governor he was and acting just like a king. And we're going to jump right into the story. But before we do, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video with others. It doesn't cost you anything except for a couple seconds of your time. Go down below, hit those buttons, and then share this with others if you think they're going to be interested as well. So let's get back to our dear former Governor Inslee and his pretense, his claim, his post right here. And I kind of got this off Brian Haywood's X post, which I encourage you to follow. I'll link to that down below. But on one hand, Inslee's there saying that one king was enough. I don't know if he's referring to himself there, because he's saying that two would be too many. And yet, during the 975 days of emergency endless rule under Inslee's forever lockdown world, he was really effective at being the supreme tyrant in Washington state. And I never saw any of these people that came out for this protest, the No Kings protest. None of those people ever came out to defend all the people that were fired, that lost their jobs, the destruction of the education system, forcing all the kids to stay home, and weaponizing the bureaucracy to go out and attack every single business they could find in the state. People, and I did plenty of stories on this channel all about the businesses that they were attacking. And if there was anybody ever in the history of the state of Washington who acted more abusive than Governor Inslee, I've never found him. And so it's just ironic and, of course, very hypocritical that he pretends that he actually cares about No Kings at all. And after all, let's give him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. He does come from the Democrat Party, which has a history of doing things that aren't exactly what most of us would consider to be democracy, especially when you consider that their last presidential candidate received 0 votes from anybody. And it was an insider switcheroo after their primary was done. That's how they got Kamala Harris. And of course, lest we forget, 8 years before then, you had King or Queen Hillary Clinton herself, who somehow managed to get through the process. And in a clearly and obviously rigged process, the Supreme Court ultimately said, it's your party and you can cheat if you want to. So this is very ironic that these are the same people today that, of course, acting like tyrants for many years, they suddenly pretend and rediscover that maybe individual freedom actually matters. Now, if I actually believed it, I would support that hope right now. Maybe some of these people actually don't want abusive government. But unfortunately, almost without exception, every one of those people out there marching in those streets, they do like abusive government. They just want an abusive government that they can direct to attack you and I. This is part of the problem that we have with the way this whole thing is being presented to us. Remember, the same people that pretend like they don't want any kings, they wanted you to comply rigorously, aggressively, and as harmfully destructive as they could ever find in enforcing those lockdown mandates. And remember, when Governor Inslee here had his kingship, 975 days, he had 349 different proclamations there suddenly, where he was dictating nearly every aspect of everybody's life, including ridiculous things like getting rid of state workers who didn't take the jab, who were driving snow trucks, snow removal equipment, right before the winter. Or, of course, who can forget the fact that he basically gutted the ferry system. by removing the people down in the engine room who didn't want to get the jab. Or remember all those restaurants that are gone and not coming back again. Or remember how much he enjoyed locking down the entire school system and ensuring that a generation of kids will not have a history of normal education, and that cohort, we can still see it going through the education system today, lacking many of the educational foundations that we would expect as a bare minimum, even in the bad Common Core world of education that we have today. They're even worse than normal. And this is part of what Inslee brought to us. And let's remember, when Inslee was there, many people were out there saying that they did not support Inslee acting like a king and being Mr. Green. And I took pictures of people holding up signs just like this around here. Now, the funny thing was, the left at that time, of course, poo-pooed all of that and said, there's no such thing, Governor Inslee, he's not a king. And in fact, they supported every abusive policy that Inslee pushed on us. And he wasn't the only governor doing that, but he certainly was acting like a king of many people, the thousands and tens of thousands of people who showed up at these various rallies all over the state. They remember this, even if the Seattle Times and the traditional media and the leftists who run them have conveniently want to pretend that they've forgotten about it. So now we're back to basically the new image of the modern version of apparently the No Kings protest structure, which is going to look like this apparently all over Washington state or anywhere else in the country they decide to show up. Now, there's been some good work done on exactly who is behind these orchestrated, coordinated rallies. Who is it that funds the frozen water bottles like they were throwing at the police down in Tukwila? Who is it that organizes and pays for all the signage and the coordination and the attacks and the arson and the fireworks and all that sort of stuff? There's been a number of stories about this. I mean, ever since the George Floyd BLM lockdown riots that were occurring back in 2020, many people, including Schweitzer and others, and I will link to some of these stories down below, you'll see them down there, have gone through and analyzed where is all this money coming from and who's coordinating it and exactly how does that money ultimately get to the Antifa guys that are assaulting Brandy Cruz or the people that are organizing the groups trying to lock down the federal buildings in Seattle or in Portland. And there's some really good information that's out there. I'd encourage you to go down and look at it. You can see charts like this there that kind of link everybody together. I think it's pretty valuable. You can also see spreadsheets here that show the $114 million that have been diverted into these types of organizations. And when you have to have riots, you need somehow, especially in large number of them, synchronized and scheduled around the country, you need a lot of money to convince people to rent a mob and get out there and make it happen. And if you remember, at the very end of the Biden administration, there was that discussion and video about the people throwing gold bars off the Titanic, basically trying to get as much of your tax dollars tossed out to leftist organizations so that they could use that money to do riots and rallies and bribery and just kind of keeping the rent-a-mob going as long as they possibly can under the Trump administration. There's been other articles here recently about some of that money, the EPA mega grants that Stacey Abrams down in Georgia has been utilizing. There's a number of different articles and stories out there about it. I think we barely scratched the surface. I realize there are some congressional investigations, but ultimately at the end of the day, it's just shockingly ironic that you had Governor Inslee, of all people, out there pretending that he actually didn't think there should be any more kings. Maybe he just means there shouldn't be any more after him. I don't know. But the one thing I think to remember when we're looking at anything like this, whether it's these coordinated, obviously AstroTurf sort of events, is always number one, follow the money. It's totally fine if people want to go out there and protest. That is exactly what I think they should do. I don't care about all the protests that they want to have. I think having riots and coordinated riots where you conveniently stage pallets of bricks or frozen water bottles or fireworks or assault people as Brandy Cruz was assaulted down in Tukwila, I think that kind of thing is totally unacceptable. And I realize the left enjoys that, but that's the kind of thing that we shouldn't be having out there. And one of the bigger questions that's come out now, especially since the LA riots, but it applies here in Seattle, is some of that money that is funding these operations, is some of that originally yours and mine? I mean, do you actually want your tax dollars going to fund riots? Maybe you'd answer yes if you're a leftist, but the rest of us probably wouldn't, and that's not exactly where we want our tax dollars going. This is why I believe, among other reasons, but I mean, it's really a good reason, and one of many things that we should be looking at when we're tracking down exactly what the heck are these guys doing with our money. So if you want to learn more about that, feel free to take some of the Doge training classes. I'm trying to inspire more and more people out there. Hundreds of people have already taken those classes. We will have many more coming up in our state, and we will not stop doing those until we can actually get more people engaged and involved where we're finding out exactly what the heck's going on with all that money out there. That's what you have to do, is follow the money. It starts, though, with you and I. It starts with people who are willing to show up, willing to do the research, and it's not super exotic or exciting. It's probably not as fun as throwing frozen water bottles at police or starting fires in downtown Seattle. But it is the necessary part of just being an engaged and involved citizen who wants to hold government accountable and expose the truth. It starts by exposing the truth. It starts with you and I, and it starts with our willingness to show up. Because, as I always say, in the end, the future belongs to those who show up.